Welcome to my 2024 book recap and my 2025 reading goals. I'm so excited for this video. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, mostly through my stats on Storygraph. And then I have a lot of different reading goals this year, usually just a number of books, but I have a whole kind of category system situation for my reading goals for this coming year. So come along with me, grab a little drink. I have my little book themed mug, and let's get started. All right, so the amount of books I've read this year is actually quite a bit lower than what I usually read. I usually read 50 books a year. This year I read 45 books and 16,419 pages. So I think the page count is about the same than I normally read. But I read a lot of fantasy, specifically Brandon Sanderson. So you will see that in my stats. So I feel good. I feel good about 45 with all the Stormlight Archive books that I've read, which are a little bit over 1,000 pages each. So I feel good about that. In terms of my moods for books, it's quite interesting. My most common moods are dark, emotional, mysterious, and tense. So, it is what it is. I want to be like a light-hearted book girly, and I did read a little bit more romance this year, but I do like my spooky, tense, dark academia reads. So that is what it is. I love them. So in terms of the page number, 11%, about half of the books I've read were 300 to 500 pages, and then about 11% were over 500, which were mostly Brandon Sanderson books, but also Gone Girl, The Secret and The Secret History, which The Secret History, it's a very popular book. I did like it, but I do feel like it dragged on a little bit. I will say that, but I did like it. Don't come at me, dark academia girls, don't kill me. But I did like it. It just kind of dragged, and it was much longer than I thought it was going to be. In terms of fiction to nonfiction, and this is kind of related to one of my reading goals for this coming year, I only read 9% nonfiction books. So I only read 4 nonfiction books this year. One was How I Became a Tree, How to Keep House While Drowning, God Gave Rock and Roll to You, and Raising Lazarus. Honestly, I liked most of the nonfiction book. The one I absolutely hated was How I Became a Tree. I gave it like 2 stars. So that was one of my least favorite books of the year. And then in terms of genres, this is kind of no surprise. My top 2 are literary and fantasy, then LGBTQIA plus, and romance, which I read a lot more romance this year. I'm trying to figure out the type of romance that I like. But I'm really glad I read a lot of different kinds of books this year. And in terms of the authors that I read the most, it was number 1, Brandon Sanderson. I read 3 of his Stormlight Archive books. I'm currently reading the 4th one, so I've read a lot of Brandon Sanderson this year. Then it's Becky Chambers, which her books, I just read 2. I read 2 Ava Reed, and I read 2 Alana Ferrante books, which love all those authors. Those are probably some of my top authors of all time. So I'm very happy with that. And then my reading itself was so off and on. My November, I did a reading, 24-hour reading that month. I remember that. And I think I did one in September as well. So like I had higher books, but I realized I got into a little bit of a reading slump afterwards. So I don't know if those experiments are actually that helpful, but yeah, it looks like I kind of got into a reading slump afterwards. So, just a note for myself. And then lastly, I'm going to do my average rating and then my least favorite and favorite books of the year. My average rating was 3.82. which I think is pretty fair. I did a lot of 4 stars. I did like 10 4 stars. And I think sometimes when I like a book, but it's not a top fave, I did 4 stars. So I don't know. But my least favorite books of last year were Daisy Darker, which is like a mystery, like a murder mystery situation. And I thought I was going to like it because it was like an island and there was water and all this kind of stuff. And it was like rich people and it was all about like an inheritance and stuff. But honestly, it was just like there were so many plot holes. I was just like, I finished it because I did want to know what happened, and I was so disappointed by the ending. I was like, ugh. Same thing for this next one. I'm thinking of ending things. I felt like it kind of made me feel gross at the end. Like I didn't love it, and it made me feel icky, especially as a woman. And I didn't really love the writing. But it was at least short, so that's good. Daisy Darker was too long. And then lastly, How I Became a Tree. It was kind of poetry, kind of nature. I wanted it to be more like nonfiction nature, telling me things about Indian nature. It's based in India. I wanted it to be more like Braiding Sweetgrass, which she kind of integrates Native American stories into kind of facts and biology about plants. How I Became a Tree advertised itself like that, but I just really didn't like the way she did it. It kind of just felt like a bunch of musings that didn't really connect to anything, and there was not really any information about like nature like at all in the whole book. So didn't like it. It might be for somebody else, but I personally didn't like it. And my top 3 favorite books, and these I'm doing like definitely based on my rating, but also based on like me thinking about the book throughout the year, even if I've read it earlier on, like the books I've thought about the most and like pondered about and want to talk to other people about. So number 1, I actually didn't rate it 3 stars, but I just cannot stop thinking about it. I Who Have Never Known Men. This is kind of a philosophy, sci-fi type of book, kind of like a end of the world sci-fi. You're looking at this from the perspective of a girl who was too young to remember actually what happened. But basically one day these aliens or something come to the world. Somebody comes to Earth and everyone's split up, and you're in like sections of I think like 20 women, and they don't really know what happened to the men, but they're in their own kind of room with 20 women, and this girl never knew men. She only knew the men that kind of go around the periphery of their giant room, and they can't really do anything. They're just there for years and years and years and years, and then some things happen in the book. But this girl really was like curious about what the world was like before, what men were like, what dating was like, and these other women who are older than her, so do remember what the Earth was like, don't really want to give her that information. This book, though, this book is just like, I would just go into it mostly blind, even though I kind of described some things. I want to talk a little bit more about it, but the way that she just like discovers things on her own is incredible. But yes, this book I cannot stop thinking about. The next book is sort of a book, sort of the series, but the Stormlight Archive series is a epic fantasy series by Brandon Sanderson. My favorite book of the series is Words of Radiance, which is the second book of the series. I just feel like the first book you're really getting to know the characters and kind of separate characters and separate stories, and then the second book the characters kind of interact more with each other and it becomes like one big story, and that's why I kind of like the second book more. But basically the Stormlight Archive series is following the Alethi group of people who started a war with some other creatures because they had somebody, this mysterious figure, all in white, kill their king. But this war has gone on forever, and it's more about political conquest and earning money than it is about the original kind of vengeance for their king. There's just too much of this book to describe. Yeah, it's just kind of a wild ride, and I love how Brandon Sanderson kind of digs into the psychology of these characters and these complex non-diagnosed disorders that they have, and how they have powers, but the powers don't like fix them necessarily. It just sometimes makes those issues worse. So that's why I love Brandon Sanderson. But lastly, the last book is also kind of I want to say like a fiction mental health book. It's definitely fiction, and it's sci-fi and it's cozy. This is A Psalm for the Wild-Built. It's kind of sci-fi, it's kind of fantasy, but it's a very short book, I believe. Yeah, it's just like 150 pages, but it's basically in a world where all of the robots just up and left one day. I think it's like 100 years later, a robot comes out from the forest to meet this tea monk and begin a friendship because the robot wants to know what the humans need. It's just like this beautiful story thinking about our purpose on life and our relationships and community. I love this book. I still think about it. I want to reread it this coming year again just because it's such a quick read and there's so much to it. That's my review of my reading for this year, but let's get into the reading goals. So my main reading goal is just kind of tracking. I want to create an Excel spreadsheet for myself, which tracks obviously the book that I read, when I read it, where the author is from, type of book, and getting kind of more specific genres. If I bought it, got it from a library, got it from a thrift store, got it from a little library, things like that. I want to have just like a really good tracking system for myself to give myself some information. But with that, with tracking, there's a couple things that I have in terms of like actual goals. Some things I'm just going to be curious about. But my first goal is kind of the same for each year. I want to read around 50 books next year. I think that's like a really reasonable goal for myself. So I want to read 50 books. The next thing is I want to read more nonfiction. I actually really love it when I do read nonfiction, but I think it's not really something you see on Bookstagram as much, or BookTube is like nonfiction books, but I tend to really enjoy and really think about when I read nonfiction. I want to read at least 10 nonfiction books this year, which is kind of a lot for me, but I really want to push myself to read 10 nonfiction books, which is less than one a month. So I feel like that's, I can do it, but I need to be a little bit more intentional about reading nonfiction books. Less biographies and more books about culture, history, nature, things like that. Next, in terms of where the author is from, I want to see if I can read 50% that the author is not from the United States. That might be a little hard, but I am traveling out of country for the first time since COVID this year, and I'm going out of the country. I'm going to, I think, hopefully like 3 different countries this year, and I haven't been out of the country for forever. So I really want to read books from the countries that I'm going to before I leave, and then while I am there. I think I'll have a much better travel experience if I do a little bit of that. And that's also why I want to read a little bit of nonfiction, just to read a little bit of nonfiction from those countries. Okay, lastly, this is more of like a habit for reading, but I want to figure out a time where I can read for like at least 15 minutes, if not longer, but at least 15 minutes every day at a certain time of day, like when I wake up or before bed or during lunch or something, because I think that that would be so good for me to just like get into a daily habit of like, I'm going to read at this time and I always read at this time. So I think it's probably going to be like before I go to bed, but I want to be a lot more consistent with that because I feel like I read like a whole bunch or read none at all. So that is one of my more like habits goals for my reading.
Hello, Editing Rebecca here. I had one goal I forgot to tell you guys about, which is inspired by the Books Unbound podcast, but that is for my average publishing dates to be 2010. I don't want to just be reading new releases all this year. I definitely want more classics, some more older books. So in my Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to be doing the published date of the book and then see what my average year is. So that'll be exciting to look back at. It's a goal, but it's not like a hard goal. I'm more just curious what my average date will be.
Those are all my goals for 2025. Oh my gosh, that sounds like such a big year. Um, but yes, I think I might do like quarterly updates on my reading goals. If you're interested in that, please let me know. Then I can do like, I can put it into like a vlog, or I can make a video, like a shorter video itself on some of these updates. But yes, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.